Outlaws attack weak old man. They freeze when they see his tribal tattoo. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. In the vast and rugged hills of the Old West, there was an old man named Jebediah Wells. He had lived alone for many years, keeping to himself in his tiny cabin nestled deep in the wilderness. A man of few words and even fewer visitors, Jebediah was known by the locals as a quiet, mysterious figure who had once been a soldier, a life that seemed as distant as the days of the Civil War. His frail body, now weakened by age, could barely hold up the weight of his past, but his mind was still sharp. He had learned to live off the land, hunting and gathering what he needed to survive. However, his solitude would not last. On a warm spring afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, 3 outlaws rode into the area. Their horses kicked up dust as they approached Jebediah's cabin, their faces hardened by years of lawlessness. They were looking for easy prey, and Jebediah seemed like the perfect target. Weak, defenseless, and alone, they thought they had found their victim. The leader of the outlaws, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, called out to the old man, demanding he come out. Jebediah, hearing the commotion, slowly rose from his rocking chair, his bones creaking with every movement. As he stepped outside, he faced the 3 men, who grinned at the sight of him. They were prepared to rob him, perhaps even kill him if he resisted, but they underestimated what they were about to encounter. The leader, standing in front of Jebediah, sneered and mocked him, asking if the old man had any last words. Jebediah, ever calm, simply stared at them, his wrinkled face emotionless. But it was then that one of the outlaws noticed something strange. Jebediah's sleeve had fallen back slightly, revealing a tribal tattoo on his forearm. It was a symbol, intricate and powerful, representing a tribe long lost to history. The tattoo was said to carry the strength and the curse of those who wore it, a secret that only a few knew about. As the outlaw stared at the tattoo, his eyes widened with shock. He recognized it immediately, the mark of a warrior tribe that had once ruled these lands. The outlaws froze, their smirks vanishing as the reality of who Jebediah might be began to sink in. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The leader of the outlaws, once so confident, took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. But his hesitation was all too clear. He was no longer sure whether attacking this old man was a wise decision. The others followed his lead, glancing at each other nervously, wondering if they had made a grave mistake by picking on the wrong person. Jebediah remained still, his piercing eyes locked on the outlaws, the weight of his past not just in his gaze, but in the very air around him. The tattoo on his arm was not just a symbol, it was a warning. The outlaws, realizing they were in the presence of someone far more dangerous than they had assumed, began to feel the cold sweat forming on their brows. Would they leave the old man be, or would they push forward, testing the ancient powers that might lie beneath his frail exterior? The tension was thick, and it seemed as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for the next move. Jebediah's hand slowly moved to his side, where an old rifle rested. He had learned long ago that sometimes, to protect what was his, he had to remind people of the power they had forgotten in their arrogance. And now, as the sun began to set, the outlaws would soon learn that even the weakest-looking man could be the most dangerous when they least expected it. The outlaws stood frozen, their hands hovering near their weapons, as they stared at Jebediah. The air was thick with tension, and the old man's piercing gaze made them second-guess their every move. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The leader of the outlaws, who had once been so sure of himself, now hesitated, his eyes darting nervously from Jebediah to the other 2 men. The quiet was deafening. The old man had not moved an inch, his frail figure still and unmoving. The tattoos on his arm, an intricate pattern of symbols, seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if carrying the weight of centuries of history. The leader took a slow step back, trying to make sense of the situation. He was no fool. He knew that some things in this world were better left undisturbed, and this old man, despite his frailty, was one of those things. But greed, as it often does, clouded the judgment of the outlaws. They had come to this remote part of the land looking for trouble, and they found it in the form of an old man who had lived far beyond the usual rules of the West. "What do you want, old man?" The leader's voice was shaky, but he tried to mask it with a false bravado. Jebediah's eyes never left him. "I want nothing from you," he replied, his voice low but steady. The leader frowned, but before he could say anything else, one of the outlaws, younger and more eager, stepped forward. "What's with the tattoo?" he asked, his voice filled with both curiosity and fear. "It's not just ink on skin," Jebediah said, his tone sharp now. "It's a mark of my past. A reminder of what happens when people think they can take what they want without paying the price." The outlaw snorted dismissively. "You think we care about your old man's tattoos? We're not scared of a weak old man like you." His words were harsh, but as soon as they left his mouth, he regretted them. Jebediah's eyes flicked to the tattoo again, and something in his expression shifted. It was as if he was no longer the frail, weak old man standing before them. For a brief moment, they saw the warrior that he once was, the strength that had carried him through countless battles in his youth. The outlaws exchanged uncertain glances. The leader, realizing they had underestimated Jebediah, took a step back, his eyes never leaving the old man. "We don't want any trouble, old man," he said, his voice now strained. "We were just looking for supplies." Jebediah let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh. "Supplies?" he asked, his voice suddenly soft. "You came here, thinking you could take what wasn't yours. But you'll learn that some things don't belong to people like you." The leader's hand tightened around his gun, but he didn't draw it. The weight of Jebediah's words settled over him like a cloud. He had heard of the tribes, the legends of the warriors who had once ruled these lands. He had heard whispers about the power of their tattoos, the ancient symbols that gave them strength. The silence stretched on, the only sound being the wind rustling through the trees. Finally, Jebediah spoke again, his voice low but unmistakable. "Leave now, while you still can." The outlaws hesitated, unsure of what to do. They had expected an easy target, someone they could overpower with ease. But now, in the presence of this old man, they felt something shift, something they couldn't explain. The leader swallowed hard. He glanced at the other two men, who both nodded in agreement, their expressions filled with uncertainty. "We're leaving," the leader muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "But remember, old man, we're not done with you." With that, the three outlaws turned and mounted their horses, their heads low, their movements slow. Jebediah watched them leave, his eyes cold and unblinking. When the outlaws were finally out of sight, he allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He knew they would return, sooner or later. But next time, it wouldn't be so easy for them. The old man turned back to his cabin, his mind already racing with the knowledge that this encounter was far from over. He had lived through too much, seen too many battles to be taken by surprise now. The tattoo on his arm wasn't just a symbol of his past, it was a warning. And he would make sure that the outlaws learned that lesson the hard way. The outlaws rode off into the distance, leaving Jebediah standing alone in front of his cabin. He had expected them to return, but even he didn't anticipate how soon that would be. The evening air was thick with tension, and as the sun set behind the hills, he knew that the worst was yet to come. The tattoo on his arm, the one that had saved him today, had a history that went far beyond anything the outlaws could imagine. It was not just a symbol of his past, but of the promise he had made to his people long ago. A promise to protect, to fight, and to never let anyone forget the strength of his tribe. As Jebediah prepared to head inside, a shadow passed across the clearing. He stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the rifle resting against the wall of the cabin. But the figure that emerged from the trees was not one of the outlaws. Instead, it was a woman, tall and strong, with eyes that seemed to know everything. Her face was weathered from years of hardship, but there was a quiet power in the way she carried herself. She approached him slowly, her footsteps deliberate. "I knew you would be here," she said, her voice low but steady. Jebediah's heart skipped a beat. "I didn't expect company," he replied, his voice cautious. "You're not alone, though," she said, her gaze sharp as it flicked to the hills in the distance. "The outlaws are not far. They will be back soon, and they won't leave empty-handed." Jebediah nodded. understanding the gravity of her words. "I'm ready for them," he said. The woman's eyes softened slightly. "I've seen your tattoo," she said quietly. "I know what it means." "But they don't." "They will," Jebediah replied. "When they come back, they'll understand what they've stirred up. And it won't be so easy for them this time." The woman studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "You're not the only one who has waited for this moment," she said. "I'm here to help you. You'll need it." Jebediah felt a flicker of surprise. "I don't need help," he said, his voice firm. "I've lived alone for years, and I've learned how to handle things on my own." The woman's gaze hardened. "You're not alone anymore. This fight is bigger than you, old man. It's bigger than anyone. The outlaws won't stop until they get what they want, and they won't be afraid to burn this whole valley to the ground." Jebediah's grip tightened on his rifle, the weight of her words sinking in. He had faced many enemies in his life, but none like this. These outlaws were relentless, and they had no respect for anything or anyone. "Then we'll make sure they learn the hard way," he said, his voice full of determination. The woman smiled, a faint hint of approval in her eyes. "That's the spirit," she said. "But we need to be smart about this. They won't come alone next time. They'll bring more men, and they'll come at night. We need to be ready." Jebediah looked at her, his mind working quickly. "You've been tracking them," he said, his voice low. "What do you suggest?" She crouched down next to him, pointing to the ground. "There's a narrow pass near here, where the hills come together. It's perfect for an ambush. We can use the terrain to our advantage." Jebediah nodded, his eyes scanning the landscape. He had spent years living in these hills, knowing every rock, every tree, every path. He could make the land work for him. "We'll wait for them there," he said, "and we'll make them regret ever setting foot in this valley." The woman stood up, her expression hardening. "We'll need to be quick. The outlaws don't give up easily, but we'll make sure they understand the cost of their greed." Jebediah nodded once more. "I've been ready for this moment for a long time." The woman turned to leave, her silhouette disappearing into the shadows of the trees. "We'll meet at dawn," she said over her shoulder. "Be ready, Jebediah." As the night settled in, Jebediah sat outside his cabin, his mind racing with plans and preparations. He knew the outlaws would be back, and this time, they wouldn't be the ones calling the shots. They would learn what it meant to face the wrath of a tribe they had long underestimated. The tattoo on Jebediah's arm was not just a symbol of his past. It was a promise that no one would ever take what didn't belong to them again. The first light of dawn touched the hills as Jebediah stood on the ridge, overlooking the narrow pass where he and the woman had agreed to make their stand. He had spent the long hours of the night preparing, setting traps, and using every bit of knowledge he had gained from his years in the wilderness. The land was his ally, and he would use it to its fullest advantage. His hand rested on the rifle at his side as he surveyed the terrain. The woman had been right. This was the perfect spot for an ambush. The narrow pass was a bottleneck, a place where the outlaws would be forced to slow down, making them vulnerable. Jebediah adjusted his worn hat and turned to the woman, who had arrived just before dawn. She was calm, her eyes sharp with focus. "They'll be here soon," she said, her voice barely a whisper against the rising wind. Jebediah nodded. "I know," he replied. "We need to be ready." The woman gave him a quick nod before disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Jebediah returned his gaze to the pass. His mind raced as he thought about what had led him to this moment. He had lived his life as a quiet man, seeking solitude after years of bloodshed and violence. But now, after all these years, he found himself drawn back into a fight, not just for his survival, but for something much more important. The tattoo on his arm, the mark of his people, was not just a symbol of strength. It was a reminder of the promise he had made to protect what was his, to defend his land, and to honor the legacy of those who had come before him. The outlaws had no idea what they had stirred up when they decided to attack him. They thought he was just another weak old man, a simple target for their greed. But they had no way of knowing that the mark on his arm was a warning, a sign that they were about to face something much greater than themselves. Jebediah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hooves in the distance. He stood still, waiting. The outlaws were coming, just as he had expected. As they neared, he could hear their voices, the sound of them laughing and shouting. They had no idea that their laughter would soon turn to fear. The woman appeared beside him again, her presence silent but reassuring. They're almost here, she said, her eyes scanning the horizon. Let's make sure they don't leave with what they came for. Jebediah's grip tightened on his rifle as he nodded. The time for waiting was over. The outlaws entered the pass, their horses clopping against the ground, their voices growing louder as they got closer. They were so confident, so sure of their victory that they never noticed the trap waiting for them. The first outlaw came around the bend, his face twisted with a smug grin, but that smile faded quickly as he saw Jebediah standing in the middle of the pass, rifle in hand. The others halted behind him, their faces shifting from arrogance to confusion. You again, the leader of the outlaws said, his voice tinged with disbelief. I thought we told you to stay out of our way, old man. Jebediah's eyes never wavered as he locked gazes with the leader. You should have listened, he said, his voice steady, full of the weight of the promise he had made long ago. This is my land, and you'll pay for trying to take it. The leader sneered. You're nothing but an old man. What are you going to do, shoot us? Jebediah's eyes flicked to the woman, who stood motionless behind him, her hand resting on the knife at her side. Then he turned his attention back to the leader, his voice quiet but firm. I've seen men like you before. Greedy, violent, and full of themselves. But you're not going to walk out of here today. With a sudden motion, Jebediah raised his rifle. The outlaws were too slow to react. The first shot rang out, echoing off the hills, and the leader's horse reared up in fear. The outlaw closest to him fell, a spray of dirt and blood splattering the ground. Panic swept through the group, but it was already too late. The trap had been set, and the outlaws were trapped. Jebediah moved quickly, using the terrain to his advantage. The woman struck silently, taking down one of the outlaws before he even knew she was there. The remaining outlaws tried to escape, but they were too disoriented, too slow. The battle was over in moments. The outlaws lay sprawled on the ground, their weapons useless. The leader, who had once been so sure of his victory, was on his knees, his eyes wide with terror as he realized that he had underestimated the old man. Jebediah approached him, his rifle still in hand. I warned you, he said, his voice low and unforgiving. The leader looked up at him, fear in his eyes. Please, he begged. We didn't know. We thought you were just an old man. Please let us go. Jebediah knelt down in front of him, his face calm, his eyes steady. You came here looking for trouble, and you found it, he said. But now, you'll leave with a lesson. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the outlaws to face the consequences of their actions. The woman stood beside him, a silent understanding passing between them. They had won, but the war was far from over. There were more outlaws, more threats, and more battles to fight. But for now, they had protected their land, and that was enough. The morning after the battle, Jebediah stood at the edge of his cabin, staring out at the vast, open land that stretched before him. The outlaws had left, but their presence still lingered in the air, a reminder of the violence and greed that had been brought to his doorstep. His mind raced as he thought about the consequences of their actions, the lives they had taken, and the chaos they had stirred. But it was over now. For the moment, the valley was at peace. The woman who had stood by him the night before approached, her figure silhouetted against the rising sun. She moved with the same quiet strength that had impressed him from the start. Jebediah turned to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the calm expression on her face. They won't come back, he said, his voice low and steady. No, she replied, her gaze thoughtful. But others will. This valley may be quiet for now, but the world is changing. The outlaws won't be the last to come looking for what they think they can take. Jebediah nodded slowly, understanding the truth in her words. He had lived through too many wars, too many battles, to think that this would be the end of it. There would always be others, drawn by greed or vengeance, who would come for what they could not have. What now? He asked, his voice soft. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. Now we prepare, she said. The land is yours, but the world is not. There are many who would take it from you, and we can't afford to wait until they come knocking again. Jebediah's mind was already working. He had lived in isolation for years, but the reality was that he couldn't protect the land alone. He needed help, allies, and a plan to defend what was his. I've lived alone for a long time, he said, his voice tinged with regret. But maybe you're right. I can't do this by myself. The woman smiled faintly, a touch of understanding in her eyes. "No one can," she said simply. "You need to gather the people who will stand with you. The ones who know the value of this land. The ones who understand what it means to fight for something greater than themselves." Jebediah's thoughts turned to the people in the valley, the farmers, the ranchers, the families who had built their lives here. They had always been scattered, isolated, just like him, living in quiet peace. But now, he realized, they were all part of the same fight. "I know some of them," he said, "but convincing them won't be easy. They're afraid. The land is wild, and it's hard to trust anyone out here. Fear is a powerful thing," the woman said, her voice soft but firm. "But so is hope. You have to show them that standing together is their only chance, that the land they've built their lives on is worth fighting for." Jebediah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. It wasn't just his land anymore. It was theirs, and he would protect it with everything he had. "I'll talk to them," he said, "but it won't be easy. Some won't believe me. Some won't trust me." The woman nodded. "I'll be here," she said. "I'll help you, but the rest is up to you. The outlaws are only the beginning, Jebediah. You have to decide what kind of man you want to be." Jebediah watched her for a long moment, her words sinking into his heart. He had always been a man of action, a man of few words. But now, as the weight of the coming battle pressed on him, he realized that words, too, had their power. "I'll fight," he said, his voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." The woman smiled, a small but approving smile. "Then we'll begin," she said. "We'll start by talking to the people. And together, we'll make sure they know the price of taking what doesn't belong to them." Jebediah turned back to the valley, his heart filled with a new sense of purpose. The sun was rising higher now, casting its golden light over the land he had fought for and would continue to protect. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, for what was his, and for the people who had stood by him. And as he took the first step toward the fight ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He would never face it alone. Days passed, and Jebediah wasted no time gathering the people of the valley. The words of the woman still echoed in his mind. He needed to show the people what they stood to lose, and he needed to show them that together, they could protect the land. He had always been a solitary man, content to keep to himself, but now he knew that he couldn't stand alone any longer. The valley was his home, but it was also the home of others, people who had families, who had lives to protect. They needed to understand that their survival depended on unity. One by one, he went from ranch to farm, speaking with the farmers, the ranchers, and the families who lived in the valley. At first, many were reluctant. They had seen their fair share of trouble and weren't eager to fight battles that didn't seem to concern them. Some were scared of the outlaws, scared of the unknown, scared of losing everything they had worked for. But Jebediah's words began to sink in. He didn't speak with threats or anger. Instead, he spoke from the heart, sharing the story of the land, of his people, and of the tattoo that had marked him as a warrior in a world that had forgotten the power of the past. The outlaws were only the beginning, he told them. There were others out there who would come for the valley, and if they didn't stand together, they would lose it all. Slowly, the people began to listen. It wasn't easy. Some remained unconvinced, but one by one, they began to stand with him. The woman who had helped him, the one with the quiet strength, was by his side every step of the way, helping to rally the people and teach them how to defend their homes. The tension in the valley began to shift. Where fear had once ruled, now there was a sense of purpose. The people started to prepare for what was coming. They built defenses, reinforced their homes, and gathered what they could to protect themselves. The outlaws had made a mistake by underestimating Jebediah, and they had made an even bigger mistake by underestimating the people of the valley. The days turned into weeks, and Jebediah knew the time to act was drawing near. He stood with the woman once again, watching the valley from the same ridge where they had stood before. "They're coming," Jebediah said quietly. "They always do." The woman nodded, her gaze steady. "But now, you have more than just yourself to protect. You have the valley behind you." Jebediah turned to face her. "And I'll protect them with everything I have," he said. The woman smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure they understand that." As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the valley, Jebediah felt a sense of peace settle over him. This was no longer just about survival. It was about something much bigger. It was about standing up for what was right, for what belonged to the people who had trusted him. And as the shadows lengthened across the land, he knew that the outlaws would soon realize that they had picked the wrong fight. The valley was no longer the weak, forgotten place it once was. It had become a force to be reckoned with. Jebediah's promise to his people was simple: no one would take what was theirs without a fight, and he would make sure they never had to fight alone. The tension in the valley grew with each passing day. Jebediah could feel it in the air, thick and heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. The people of the valley had prepared as best as they could, but now, all they could do was wait. The outlaws were coming. It was only a matter of time. Jebediah stood at the ridge again, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was beginning to dip below the mountains, casting long shadows over the land. He could hear the faint sound of horses in the distance, the faintest hint of dust rising from the ground. He knew they were coming. The woman who had stood by him was there as well, her presence steady and silent. She had been with him every step of the way, guiding him, helping him rally the people, but now even she seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "They're close," Jebediah muttered. The woman nodded, her face calm, but her eyes hard. "We're ready," she said. "The people are ready." Jebediah's grip tightened on his rifle as he turned back to face the valley. "I hope they are," he said quietly. "This isn't just about us anymore. This is about them. The valley. Everything we've built." The woman's gaze softened slightly. "They're not just fighting for the land, Jebediah," she said. "They're fighting for their families. For their future." Jebediah nodded, understanding what she meant. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for what mattered most. The outlaws didn't just want to take the land. They wanted to break the people, to strip them of everything they held dear. "They won't get away with it," Jebediah said, his voice firm. "I'll make sure of that." The woman smiled faintly, a hint of pride in her eyes. "You've already made sure of it. But this isn't just about you anymore, Jebediah. This is about the people. This is their fight too." Jebediah looked out over the valley again, his mind racing with thoughts of what would happen next. He had always been a man of action, of decisive moves and quick thinking, but now he felt the weight of the situation more than ever. The valley had become more than just a place. It had become a symbol of defiance, of resistance, and of unity. He had led these people to this moment, and now it was time to see if they could stand together against the threat that was coming for them. As night began to fall, the people of the valley gathered, taking their positions along the ridges and behind the trees. They had set up traps, made makeshift barricades, and prepared for the worst. Jebediah walked among them, his eyes scanning the faces of those who had placed their trust in him. He could see the fear in their eyes, but there was something else there too. Determination. They were ready. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was all that mattered. The woman walked beside him, her hand resting on the hilt of the knife she carried. "We'll fight, Jebediah," she said softly. "But we'll fight smart. The outlaws won't expect what's coming." Jebediah nodded. "They won't know what hit them," he said, his voice cold with resolve. As the first stars began to appear in the sky, the sound of hooves grew louder, and the valley fell silent. The outlaws had arrived. Jebediah felt his heart race, but his mind was clear. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for had finally arrived. The people of the valley stood ready, waiting for his signal. And as the outlaws made their way into the narrow pass, Jebediah gave the signal. The battle began. The first shots rang out, echoing through the valley as the people of the land fought back with everything they had. The outlaws, taken by surprise, were forced into disarray. They had underestimated the valley's resolve, and now they were paying the price. Jebediah fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. The rifle in his hands was steady, his aim true as he took down one outlaw after another. The woman fought beside him, her movements swift and efficient, her knife cutting through the air with deadly precision. The outlaws were no match for the people of the valley. They had underestimated them, and now they would pay the price. As the battle raged on, the outlaws began to retreat, realizing that they had no chance of winning. But Jebediah wasn't done yet. He wasn't going to let them escape so easily. "Don't let them get away," he shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "We finish this now." The people of the valley pushed forward, forcing the outlaws to turn and flee. The battle was won. The valley had been defended, and the outlaws had been defeated. but the cost had been high. Jebediah stood among the fallen, his heart heavy with the weight of what had been lost. But there was also a sense of triumph. The valley had stood together, and they had won. The outlaws had underestimated them, but now they knew better. As the people began to gather around him, Jebediah knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for the valley was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. The land would remain theirs, and together, they would protect it. Forever. The dust had barely settled from the battle when Jebediah stood amidst the aftermath, surveying the scene. The air was still thick with the scent of smoke and the echoes of gunfire. The valley had won, but the cost of that victory was clear. Bodies lay scattered on the ground, some of them the outlaws, others the brave souls who had stood beside him. The fight had been fierce, but it had proven what Jebediah already knew. This land, this people, were worth fighting for. The sun was beginning to set, casting a red glow over the valley as Jebediah walked among the fallen. He knelt beside one of his own, a young rancher who had fought valiantly. The man's face was still, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. Jebediah placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent promise made. "We'll honor you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. As he stood, the woman who had fought beside him appeared, her face set with determination, but her eyes betraying a trace of sadness. "They're gone," she said softly, her voice quiet but steady. "But we're still here." Jebediah nodded, his gaze shifting to the horizon. "Yes," he replied, "we're still here, and that means we have work to do." The woman was silent for a moment before she spoke again, her tone thoughtful. "You know this won't be the end. Others will come. They'll hear about what happened here, and they'll want what we've fought so hard to protect." Jebediah turned to face her, his expression grim but resolute. "Let them come," he said. "We've proven that we can stand together. We'll protect this valley with everything we have." The woman gave a small nod, her lips curving into a faint smile. "That's the spirit," she said. "But we have to be smart. We can't let our guard down." Jebediah agreed. "I know. But for now we rest. The people need to know that we've won. They need to see that they don't have to be afraid anymore." As the night settled in, Jebediah gathered the people of the valley around a large fire. The flames crackled, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the men, women, and children who had come together to defend their home. They had fought side by side, and now they stood together in the light of their victory. Jebediah stood before them, his voice steady and strong. "We've faced something terrible," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "We've faced fear, we've faced death. But we've also faced each other, and that's what made us stronger." The people of the valley nodded, their faces proud but tired. Jebediah continued, "This land is ours. It's been passed down through the generations, and it will continue to be passed down to our children and their children. We'll protect it, we'll fight for it, and we'll stand together, no matter what comes our way." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing through the valley. Jebediah felt a swell of pride rise in his chest. This was his family, his community. They had stood together, and they had won. But even as the cheers died down, Jebediah knew this wasn't the end. The valley had proven that it could stand against the odds, but the world outside was full of dangers. He had no illusions about the future. The outlaws were just the first of many threats that would come. But for the first time in a long time, Jebediah felt a sense of hope. The people of the valley had shown that they were stronger than any foe, and together, they could weather any storm. As the fire crackled and the people celebrated, Jebediah stood off to the side, his gaze distant. He thought of the tattoo on his arm, the mark of his tribe, the symbol of his heritage. It was a reminder of the strength that ran through his blood, the strength that would continue to guide him and the people of the valley. He had made a promise to protect this land, and he would keep that promise, no matter the cost. The woman approached him, her presence silent but comforting. "You did well," she said quietly. Jebediah nodded, his eyes still fixed on the fire. "We did well," he corrected her. Together, they stood in silence for a moment, the warmth of the fire contrasting with the cold wind that blew through the valley. It was a peaceful night, but Jebediah knew that the peace wouldn't last forever. There would be more battles to fight, more threats to face. But as long as he had the people of the valley by his side, he knew they would endure. "Tomorrow, we rebuild," Jebediah said softly. "But tonight, we rest." The woman nodded. We rest, she agreed. As they stood together, watching the flames dance in the night, Jebediah knew one thing for certain. The valley was no longer a place forgotten by the world. It had become a symbol of resistance, a place where the people fought for what was rightfully theirs. And as long as he was alive, he would ensure that it stayed that way. The days that followed the battle were filled with both work and reflection. Jebediah stood on the ridge overlooking the valley once more, feeling the weight of what had transpired, but also the weight of what still needed to be done. The people had rebuilt quickly, stronger than before, but Jebediah knew that peace was never permanent in a place like this. He had fought to protect this land, and he had won, but there would always be another fight, another battle waiting just around the corner. The woman who had fought beside him stood next to him, her quiet presence a steady reminder of the strength they had found in each other. "You did it," she said softly, breaking the silence between them. Jebediah turned to look at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We did it," he corrected her. "Together." She nodded, her gaze still fixed on the valley below. "But this won't be the last fight," she said. "There are always more coming. You know that as well as I do." Jebediah's smile faded as he nodded in agreement. He had always known that this land would never be free of threats. He had fought for it, but that fight was never truly over. "I know," he said quietly, "but we've shown them what happens when they underestimate us." The woman looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You've shown them, yes," she said, "but you've also shown yourself what you're capable of. You've become more than just the old man in the valley. You've become a leader, Jebediah." He shook his head. "I never wanted to be a leader," he said. "I just wanted to live in peace. But sometimes, peace requires action. And when the people needed me, I couldn't turn away." The woman smiled faintly. "You didn't turn away," she said. "You stood up. And that's what matters." Jebediah's thoughts drifted to the people of the valley. They had fought with him, side by side, and now they were stronger, more united than ever before. But the world outside their valley was vast, and it was filled with people who didn't care about their peace, their land, or their way of life. Jebediah knew that as long as he was alive, he would have to keep fighting for this land, for these people. "I've made a promise," he said softly, more to himself than to the woman standing beside him. "I promise to protect this place. And I will." She nodded. "I know you will." There was a brief silence between them before she spoke again. "What will you do now, Jebediah? After all of this?" Jebediah looked out at the valley one last time, the setting sun casting long shadows over the land. He had lived through so much, seen so many battles, and yet he still felt the pull of the land, the responsibility he had taken on. "I'll keep doing what I've always done," he said. "I'll protect the land, protect the people. And when the next fight comes, I'll be ready." The woman gave him a small, approving nod. "You're not alone anymore, Jebediah. You've got a whole valley standing with you." He turned to face her, his heart heavy with the weight of the future, but also filled with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. "Together," he said, the word carrying the strength of the bond they had formed. "Together," she echoed. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees filled the silence, and for a moment, Jebediah allowed himself to just breathe, to just be. He had fought hard for this valley, for the people, and for the peace they had now. It was hard-earned, but it was theirs. The sun sank lower, casting the valley in a golden light. The fight was never truly over, but in this moment, Jebediah felt that they had won. The outlaws had come, and they had been defeated. The valley had stood strong, and so had its people. And as Jebediah watched the horizon, he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the people of the valley at his side. The land would remain theirs, and they would protect it, for as long as it took.